welcome to the Book of the Week on a Friday. Today's host is going to be Zvezdana, and welcome to Louise Miller, the author. At the moment, we've got a couple of guests from outside, and the rest are members of the staff. So, Zvezdana, I'm going to hand over to you, and I will just click the slides away as you tell me. I'm just going to turn my voice off as well.
Shall we go for the next slide? Thank you very much, Michaela. Yes, so we'll start with a few photographs and few famous images of women. So not only from the suffrage movement, but you can see here also the other from Emily Pankhurst, from Garrett, from Edith Cavell, and also the statue of Florence Nightingale. And in the middle is the bronze statue of Dr. Elsie Inglis, who was in charge and one who started Scottish Ring Hospitals, one of the most important women's hospitals during the Great War. Can we have the next slide, please? Now, this is quite small. I'm not sure that you will be able to read, but I don't mind sending later on if somebody wants this PowerPoint presentation for you, if you want. But this Women's Suffrage Timeline, which I compiled from British Library sources, started in 1832 with the first women's suffrage petition to be presented to Parliament by Mary Smith from Yorkshire. Then we have questions whether and how women will get the right to vote. And the fight lasted really about 60 years, or maybe even 100. If we put all together. So from some acts that gave some of the rights, and if you go 100 years ago at the end of the 19th century, women could not inherit, women could not have a right to have their money and to do what they wanted with their money, with their property, probably with nothing. And even when they got some of the rights and they started to study, they started to get to positions, again, they did not have the same rights like men. So in 1903, the Women's Social and Political Union, which was WSPU, is formed in Manchester at the home of Emmeline Pankhurst. They adopted the motto, deeds, not words, because they were fed up with just marching, demonstrating, writing petitions, and doing everything peacefully. The conflict between suffragettes and the suffragists didn't just start from that moment. But I think that when we look from today's point of view, it looks like that the story, the history, the narrative has been rewriting in favor of suffragettes, which was not the same how it was in the beginning of the 20th century. So I really suggest for all of us to go and to check for the books and to do a little bit more research on that, to have an opinion about it. So it says here that in 1908, you also have the Women's National Anti-Suffrage League, which is formed by Mrs. Humphrey Ward. So that would be the group of women who were actually against the suffrage movement completely, who were very happy to be just women in their houses without having any special treatment and special rights. So there was a quite a big turmoil in the beginning of the century. What is possible, what is not possible, and how these women were able to get the vote and be on the right side of the history. So in 1913, the Cat and Mouse Act is introduced. Why it was introduced, and it was called actually Temporary Discharge for Ill Health Act. When the suffragettes were arrested and when they started their hunger strikes and when they were not able to actually stay in prisons, they would be released from the prison and they would have to come back later on to serve their fine. But with this inhuman treatment of them and forced feeding and how they were treated in the prison, it was really, really horrible. And today with us, it stayed like the most horrible things that happened to women during that period of history. And recent activities with demonstrations were actually like reminiscent of that period of time. In 1913, Emily Davidson is killed at Epsom Derby, and she became the martyr for the suffrage cause. And in 1914, the war started, and the situation completely changed. All the activities between suffragettes, suffragists, and the War Office and the government actually stopped, and both of the fractions at the end supported, in general, they supported the support from women during the Great War. Now, if you look at 1914, it's very important to say that at that moment, National Union of Suffrage Societies had about 50,000 members, whereas the Women's National Bankrest group, suffragettes, had about 5,000 members. They both actually joined different groups and organizations in order to help and to support joint effort for the Great War. Most important would be, and if you go for the second page, Michaela, yes. So these two most important people would be, now I lost the name, Emily Garrett and Emily Parkhurst. So can you go for the second one? Yeah. This was the topic that I put last week in the chat when 100 years ago in 1914, the hotel was burned down by the suffragists and they were treated as criminals. 100 years later, in 2014, actually, their actions were commemorated with the blue plaque on the new building, which is built at the same place. So the way how they are treated 100 years ago and today, how narrative has changed, is very interesting. I would like to hear your comments about it. Let me go for the second slide, please. Yes, so when the Great War started, there were thousands of women who tried to join various medical organizations, and they were in them on various fronts. So you have here list Royal Army Medical Corps, British Red Cross Society, Queen Mary's Army Auxiliary Corps, the Women's Sick and Wounded Convoy that was from Mabel Stobbart, Scottish Women's Hospitals of Foreign Service, Church Armies, British Farmers Hospitals, Women's Royal Air Force, St. John's Ambulance Units, Monroe Motor Ambulance Corps, Women's Royal Naval Service, which we call RANS, and so many others. So we have thousands and thousands of women who were very active during the Great War, and that was their contribution. Apart from that, we have contribution from women who were working in munition factories, on fields, and taking all sorts of jobs from men. Can we have another slide, please? Yeah. So at the beginning of 1914, the war just started. Here is the text from one of my favorite heroines from the Great War, Dr. Elsie Inglis. She wrote to Mrs. Fawcett about the creation of Scottish women hospitals for foreign service. She offered that hospitals to Foreign Office, but they did not accept it. Government just let her down and told her, like to many others, just to let it go and stay at home. And but this is what or how she thought, and not only Dr. Elsie Inglis, but many others, how to combine actually their struggle for a vote, the suffrage, and their help during the war with these medical units, hospitals, and so on. You see, we get these expert women doctors, nurses, and ambulance workers organized. We send off our units whenever they want it. Once these units are out, the work is bound to grow. The need is there, and too terrible to allow any haggling about who does the work. If we were a thoroughly good organization here, we can send out more and more units or strengthen those already out. We can add motor ambulance, organize rest stations on the lines of communication, and so on. It will depend on how well we are supplied with funds and brains at our base. Each unit ought to be carefully chosen, and the very best women doctors must go out with them. From the very beginnings, we must make it clear that our hospitals are as well equipped and well manned as any in the field. More economical, that's easy, and thoroughly efficient. I cannot think of anything more calculated to bring home to men the fact that women can help intelligently in any kind of work. So much of our work is done where they cannot see. They will see every bit of this. This is one of the most crucial quotes about the relations between these hospitals and women's activity on the fronts, and with the suffrage movement. So it's not, these are not two separate things. They are actually together. And thousands of women from Britain and from all over the world joined the medical forces. Can we have next slide, please? Yeah, so this is interesting from two positions of view. In 2014, British Embassy in Serbia issued these commemorative stamps. The stamps are about 6 heroines, but they're not only 6, there are many more, who were in Serbia during the Great War. And the first of them, as you can see, is Flora Sands, and we will hear a little bit more about her later. Here also on picture you can see Dr. Catherine MacPhail, second one, Dr. Elsie Inglis, Dr. Esmil Hatton, then a very famous suffragette, actually in the middle and lower row would be Evelina Haverfield, and the doctor from Glasgow, Elizabeth Ross. So they were British heroines which were decorated and commemorated on these centenary stamps. Can we move? Yes. So because we have Louise here, and I don't want to take over for the whole session, I just put few pictures from her book and from what I researched about Flora Sands. But I think it would be much, much better if Louise have a chance to tell us more about Flora Sands, who did not go to war as a soldier, but as a nurse. Is that correct, Louise?
Yes,
Welcome
she
again.
was. She at the time when war broke out in 1914. You know, anybody could claim to be a nurse. So you know, you could put on the uniform, and if you had the right bearing, you could really call yourself a nurse. It was during the war that registration came in for nurses. But yeah, Flora went. I think Flora was a very bored 39-year-old at the time. You know, there wasn't. You know, she wanted really excitement in her life, and living as she was just outside of London in a rather rural area. She was working in London as a secretary. She really loved kind of fast cars above all. She was a bit of an adrenaline junkie, and she was looking for excitement. So war broke out. She was in Rye at the time. She raced to London and ended up at the Red Cross, who put her in touch with a woman who was taking a small unit to Serbia. The woman was hoping, this is Mabel Gruett, she was hoping to get doctors. She got precisely none, but she got Flora, Emily Simmons, and a handful of other nurses to go with her, and that was probably almost the first time that Flora had heard of Serbia. But she found her way there really within a few days of the opening of the First World War. So she worked there as a nurse, treating some of the very first soldiers to be wounded in the war, actually, in a place called Kragujewicz. And she then came home to do some fundraising, but all the while it was overturning in her mind that she'd always wanted to be a soldier, and the conditions in Serbia, that wasn't the kind of regimented structure that you have in the British Army, and the idea came to her that perhaps, just perhaps, she could be a soldier if she really wanted. So you see over the next few months her really trying to find a way for her to work herself into the Serbian army, and she did this by joining ambulance units in 1915, late 1915. So she was very useful. I mean, she wouldn't have been allowed to have gone into the ambulance units if she wasn't of use to them. They had no use for useless appendages. I mean, this is a war, and war in Serbia was as brutal as it was anywhere. So she was useful as sort of an untrained nurse who quickly became very proficient. And she was also very useful as a soldier. She later proved herself, because, you know, this is somebody who'd grown up in the Suffolk countryside for a lot of her early existence, and she was a very good horse rider. She could drive. She also had spent a lot of her free time down at a rifle range in London, so she was a really good shot. So these are, you know, the fact that you can bind soldiers' wounds, you can fire a gun, and you can ride a horse. I mean, what else do you need? And she was also very hardy. She was pretty strong. She smoked like a trooper. I think at the time people thought that actually the more you smoked, the healthier you were. So they must have thought she was incredibly healthy. So she smoked and drank, and basically, I mean, she just wanted to do what she wanted to do. I mean, really no different than men at the time. You know, so I mean, that's really her introduction into the army. And during the course of the rest of the First World War, she proved herself enormously capable as a soldier, and of really fighting and living under some of the most, you try live on a mountain in the middle of winter in, say, 1916, with no trenches, nothing. I mean, she was there in her kind of overcoat. She was incredibly hardy. It's really the fighting, the conditions probably on the Western Front would have actually been considerably better than they were in Macedonia, where she was with the Serbian army. She was fully involved in all the fighting. In 1916, November 1916, she was gravely wounded while fighting with the army to try to take a position outside. It was then called Bitola. It's now called Monastir. And she spent a few months in and out of hospitals, but you know, joined the Serbian army again in 1917 and fought with them when they drove the largely Bulgarians who were strengthened by the Germans, drove them out of Serbia in late 1918. What else? She survived. I mean, speaking of course, we're in an epidemic period now, but you know, Flora, I think, would have been absolutely scornful of us now. I mean, this is a woman who went in to a place called Valjevo in Serbia as a nurse in 1915, where typhus was killing tens of thousands. And the chances of if you got typhus then, the chances of you dying was probably about 70 to 75%. So predictably, she caught typhus. She survived. She also, in late 1918, caught Spanish flu. Again, she was pretty ill. She apparently she slept for 3 straight days, and she was treated by a vet who actually gave her medicine, the same medicine that he used on horses, and apparently that worked brilliantly, so that brought her around. So I think she'd be rather scornful of us running as scared as we are of COVID, considering that she managed to defeat 2 rather deadly illnesses pretty readily. But that was Flora.
I remember reading about her always wanted to be, as a tomboy, she wanted to be a soldier. She was not girlish at all. And her racing cars and everything, what she had was actually living the life like she wanted.
Exactly. She just wanted to live as she wanted to live. You know, it's hardly, I mean, to be perfectly honest, it's just what most of us want. I see her and a lot of the other women who went to Serbia who, again, just wanted to do what they wanted to do. You know, it's really, I don't see that very much separates them from who we are now. These women were incredibly modern in their outlook. You know, doctors wanted to go and work as doctors. Flora wanted to go and fight as a soldier. There were other women who went to Serbia for various reasons. I mean, some of them wanted interesting work where they could really make a difference, and a lot of them were women who'd been involved in the suffrage and sometimes suffragette movement, and sometimes some of them just wanted an adventure. You know, they wanted maybe to help as they could, but you know, they wanted to change. They wanted some excitement in their lives. So you see Flora and other women going to Serbia and also Russia at the time for a variety of reasons, and really they found freedom there, which again is pretty much what most of us want now.
I remember reading from your book about her actually coming back whenever she was wounded. She would have some time going home to relax, to recuperate, and so on. But not only that, but she used that time in Britain to fundraise.
Yeah, she did a lot of charity work. She did so much. There were fundraising efforts. There were letters to newspapers. She wrote books to raise money. So a lot of the money was to bring back medical supplies. But then she also set up this scheme with Evelina Haverfield, who was a suffragette with the Women's Social and Political Union. I mean, although, you know, Evelina had left that years ago, but they worked on a scheme to send out sort of care packages to Serbian soldiers who hadn't been home for 3 or 4 years, didn't know whether their families were alive or dead, were living on sort of wintry Macedonian mountains, insufficiently dressed. So she was behind that scheme as well. So I mean, really, her devotion was to the Serbs, and she did want to do what she wanted to do, but she also wanted, of course, you know, her allegiance was with her Serbian comrades, and so and with the Serbian people as well. So she raised lots of money for them. I mean, really, it would be in probably the hundreds of thousands in terms of today's money, the amount that she raised. But I don't think, you know, one should necessarily, you know, her charity work was secondary to her soldiering, I think you have to say, but it was still significant.
Yes, yeah. Does anybody want to ask the question?
Yes, I would. Hi, Emily. My name is Sylvia. I work with Zvezdana at Chelsea Library, and I was telling our colleagues first earlier here that this is the first time, your book is the first time I managed to finish a book on war, and to my surprise, it wasn't just the First World War. I was expecting just that, and then there were 2 wars in the book, and there was a moment in the beginning, I think at the first quarter of the book, that when I read that Flora found it to be on the war very sporty, and I got a bit shocked, to be honest with you, because I'm completely against wars and I never read anything because of that. But then I kept on, I got curious. You made me curious, Emily, to go on. And by the way you tell history through story, real life stories. So that caught me. And I went on and I realized sooner than later what Flora meant by being a sporty activity, being in the world. As you said, you already answered part of my question. She was addicted to adrenaline and the adventures. She was a loose foot like myself. I love going around, lived in 4 countries so far. I understand now what she meant a bit, being a sporty activity, although it's cruel and very dangerous. But am I too far to assume that what really drove Flora to the war and to be a soldier was this drive to be in the thick of actions, the adventures, the adrenaline, and the companionship she found among the soldiers?
Oh, I think companionship was a big part of it. You know, she just loved the soldiering lifestyle. It wasn't necessarily that, you know, that she lived to go out shooting Bulgarians, although, you know, she did her fair share of that. But you know, but it was just that kind of lifestyle that she loved. And she did see war as a form of sport. But again, I don't think that was probably so very different from lots of people at the time, particularly those from a kind of perhaps an upper class or middle class background. It was seen as sport, you know, going out on the rifle range was something that people did for sport, and it was all just part of that.
Thank you.
When you said about Sylvia mentioned 2 wars, so what about the Second World War? And she stayed in Serbia, came back to England, then came back to Serbia. So what was that all about? And if you can just tell us, I think in 1922, when she finally took off her uniform and became a civilian, how actually she coped with that?
I think she coped with it very badly. You know, soldiering gave her an identity really for the first time. You know, it gave her a kind of career. I mean, she was a secretary before, but that's not an identity. It gave her an identity. It gave her a friendship. It gave her a group of people that she was one with. And then when the Serbian army was demobilized in October 1922, really she was left completely adrift. You know, she had to put on women's clothing, and she described, you know, going shopping for kind of hats and feeling completely ridiculous. And she said that she felt neither fish nor flesh. And it was absolutely horrible for her, you know, to have to go back dressed like a woman. But I think that what she felt was the same as a lot of the women who had worked in places like Serbia and Russia during the war, and they'd done incredible work, like the doctors, for example, incredible work, really pretty much not far from the front lines, really quite dangerous work. You know, they were bombed sometimes. They put themselves in considerable danger.
And some of them died also.
What? Sorry?
Some of them died and are buried now.
Largely of disease. I mean, disease was the greatest threat to them. But they came back and they'd spent their wars, you know, carrying out surgery on adult males to find out that they were, when they were forced back and when they had to come back to Britain, the roles that were available to them really were kind of working with children and the mentally ill. And, you know, there was none of the stuff that they really wanted to do. So they were really forced back, although they were still able to be doctors, they weren't able to do the work that they wanted. So I think it was really very, very difficult for women coming back who had almost complete freedom to work and also to live as they wished. And this was actually quite important. They could work as they lived, but they could also live as they wished. In Serbia, they really had almost absolute freedom to do what they wanted to do, and as a result there was quite a lot of scandal sometimes, because, you know, although many of the women behaved admirably, certain numbers of them didn't. You know, again, they wanted to do what they wanted to do, and they were also free to have relationships with each other, which they did sometimes for those who were so inclined. I mean, they had far more freedom. You know, they weren't, their neighbours, their families weren't there to kind of keep a close eye on them. So you can imagine that all these years of not being able to do what you wanted to do, not being able to do what you wanted to do, and all of a sudden you're in a place where you can do what you want to do. You were free. I mean, you can imagine that, you know, there was certainly an element of that. I think some of the unit heads had their hands full of trying to keep them under control. I think the Scottish Women's Hospitals did that very well. I think other units less so, but really it was very difficult for a lot of these women to come back at the end of the First World War. And you see actually a lot of them emigrating, actually, because I think they find Britain a very stifling place. So you have numbers of them going to places like, I don't know, India and Africa and even the United States, I think, just to escape from really the stifling environment that they found when they came back here. And even Flora, of course, she didn't stick about. You know, by the late 1920s, she'd gone to Paris, and then in 1929 she'd moved back to Belgrade with her husband.
Yeah. Also, the doctors from Ramon Abbey, Scottish Women's Hospital in France, they were particularly good in treating illnesses and wounds with the X-ray mobile units they got from Marie Curie. And what they achieved was actually completely neglected afterwards, because they were not treated as those doctors, scientists that they actually proved they were.
Yeah.
As the war finished, nothing happened. So it was very, very difficult for them.
Yeah, well, you can't look at it like the war finished and women found freedom back home. It changed some things, but there was a lot a lot of it just went back to how it had always been. It didn't change as much as one would hope. Again, in terms of the work that was available to women, the education that was available to women, it wasn't really as much of a change as perhaps one might think.
Yeah, but in 1918, the women, not all, but some of the women, got the right to vote.
Yes.
So they were over 30, they had enough property, or they were married. So there were lots of if, and so they had to wait another 10 years until 1928 for all of people above age 21 to be able to vote.
Yeah, but I mean, and there were still so many things, like, I mean, in Oxford and Cambridge, women not being able to get degrees on the set, you know, I can't remember the years, perhaps somebody else knows that, but women weren't allowed to get degrees from these universities until, I don't know what it was, years and years later, just basic stuff. You know, so there was a lot that changed and a lot that didn't.
Yes. Can I ask if anybody has a question, please, or would like to comment about any other book that you read?
Can I just ask, you mentioned she was married. Did she have any children?
No, she got married at age 53 to a white Russian called Yuri Denich, that she had at the end of the First World War. She'd been posted along the Adriatic coast, and she was in charge of him, but he was a really rather, I mean, aristocratic, 12 years younger, I think, really rather dashing sort of colonel who had been well, with all the White Russians when the Bolsheviks took over. He'd been forced out, or he would have been killed. He was also he'd had to leave his wife and young daughter behind in Soviet Russia as well. So, you know, she got married to Yuri, but I think probably technically Yuri was already married. But anyway, this is what happened. So she was 53 when she married him. And they made Belgrade their home after about 1929. They moved there.
Because I was wondering, she seemed like she would probably be the dominating force in any partnership. And, you know, not being funny, from what she's done, I'm really fascinated. I'd never heard of her until Zvezdana mentioned her. And just listen to this, it's like, oh my God, she's amazing. You know, I can feel like her life would be, you know, compared probably to any partner, is just outstanding, you know, what she's done. And just looking at the picture here where she's sitting there with a cigarette, she looks like somebody's little granny, but, you know, underneath that little face, there's, you know, so much. And it's I'm stunned listening here about it all.
Yeah, do you know, when that picture of hers, kind of a sort of an 79, 80-year-old, she still had 19 pieces of shrapnel embedded in her body from when she was, from this kind of battle that she'd been gravely wounded in late 1916 on the top of a Macedonian mountain. She was pretty tough. She had to have operations throughout pretty much the rest of her life as the shrapnel shifted. The fact that she made it to 80, considering her boozing and smoking. Actually, there was a lovely story. This came out after I wrote the book, that there was some kind of call-in, I think it was Radio Suffolk or something, and they were talking about Flora, and somebody had called in to say that when he was, she lived in a place called Woodbridge in Suffolk, and when he was a young scout, they would go door to door doing something called, I think, Bob a Job.
Yeah.
So these boys going door to door, trying to kind of raise little bits of money for scouting, I guess, and he'd knocked on Flora's door. And she'd initially, I think, dismissed him to say that, oh, I don't have anything. And then actually she called him back after. And the job that she wanted him to do was to clear out the literally dozens of empty whiskey bottles that she had in the house. So to make it 80, considering her drinking and smoking and the fact that she was kind of filled with shrapnel, she did pretty well, all in all.
Wow.
Yeah, I can see here a comment about the ages when they were when they were allowed to have degrees and so on. And Riz put 1878. That can be true, but I know for the case of Dr. Elsie Ingalls that she had triple certificates and triple medical degrees. And she could not do everything on the first her first university to be a doctor, because women were not allowed to do certain modules, and without these modules you cannot have your degree. So theoretically, yes, you can do this and that, but that was actually end of 19th century when she had to do 3 different medical degrees to gather that, and again, she was only able to work as a doctor with children, maternity, nothing else, because they were not supposed to operate on men.
No.
So it is very, very complicated. A few years ago, because I'm usually doing commemoration for women in medical missions who were on different fronts during the Great War and in Serbia and on related fronts. So we have every year commemoration in my church, remembering them. And there was a delegation from Glasgow University, because there were about 14 doctors and who were not only 14 degree holders, so not only doctors, who were either nurses, either orderlies, either doctors in Scottish hospitals. And it's fascinating what they had to do to achieve a degree and right to work.
It was very, very tough for them. They faced every single prejudice they could. I mean, male teachers who felt that these women did not deserve a place alongside the male students. Really, it was a very tough, very tough for them. And you had to be pretty determined to get through a medical degree at that time. And besides, I think with respect to the other degrees with Oxford and Cambridge, I think it was just the general, like, classics degrees or whatever. They weren't actually allowed to get the same kind of, to graduate or to get the same thing until, I mean, it could have been even into like the 1940s, I think. It was crazy. But I think the women, to get through medical school, you had to be hard as nails. You had to be really pretty tough, actually, to get through. And I think you had to be, often the women who did it were quite eccentric, and you do see quite a unusual group, you know, going to Serbia and Russia. I mean, these were very tough and determined women, sometimes very eccentric. Like, I think, Zvezdana, you mentioned the X-rays, for example, and that was Dr. Edith Stoney and her sister, I think. Again, two really incredible women scientists, but two very, very strange and unusual characters who, frankly, didn't get on with anybody. But you know, but they were very, very interesting. So you do see quite just a very, very diverse and unusual group. I find them absolutely fascinating because, you know, these are not kind of, every single one of them was a character in their own right.
Yeah. If you think about Dr. Catherine MacPhail, she was 26, I think, when she was in the late 1914, January 15, joined the group of Scottish hospitals. And she was actually the person who was not declared either as suffragist or suffragette, but she really, really determinedly wanted to be a doctor and do her job as a doctor. Mm-hmm. So that was what she wanted and what she had power. And she suffered through typhus, and she stayed and opened the hospital in Serbia afterwards. Until I think the Second World War, she was there.
Yeah, she tried to return after the end of the Second World War, but actually the partisans had taken charge, and in fact it became impossible. I think, again, Flora managed to survive the Second World War under the Nazis, but she couldn't survive the partisans. So there was really no prospect for Catherine MacPhail to come back. She'd worked in Serbia really from the end of the First, well, she'd all the way through the First World War, opened the first children's hospital in Serbia at the end of the First World War, and had worked her way all the way through until she was forced out in 1941 when the Germans invaded. Tried to come back at the end of the war, but really it was impossible. It was really again, another great tragedy for Catherine, not to be able to do the work that she loved with the people that she loved. But anyway, it was what it was.
Yes, but still in Sremska Kamenica, and that little place where she had hospital, there is a building and there is a plaque, there is a statue, and there is a street named after her.
It's unfortunate.
And we don't have anything for Flora here at all.
No, I mean, there was a pub in Thornton Heath named after her, but that closed a couple of years ago. There is a plaque in Malsford where Flora spent much of her early life, and that's to the Sands family, but I don't think there's. But no, you're absolutely right. There is a street in Belgrade, I think illegally built, I believe, but that's named after Flora. But otherwise, no. Actually, just to kind of before I forget, it's kind of a spoiler, but there is, I think the Antiques Road Trip is being filmed in Malsford in about a couple of weeks' time, and they're visiting the church there, the Malsford Church, where there's the plaque. So if you get a chance to watch it, I'm not quite sure when it's going to be on, but they'll be focusing on Flora on that, which will be absolutely amazing. Unfortunately, I'm not allowed to go down to take part in it because of all the restrictions. Otherwise, I'd be there like a shot. But that should feature her soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you. If you get more information, please send me, and I will send.
I will.
Do we have any more questions?
Is there any apart from the plaque, is there anywhere else that she's commemorated anywhere? Because I can't believe that she slipped through and people haven't really heard of her. You know.
No, there's not really. I mean, it's very difficult here. Do you know, in Edinburgh, where I'm based, there are more statues to animals than there are to women. I think in Serbia, Flora and the other women are well remembered. There's not any specific memorial or event linked to Flora, but people know who she is, which I think is probably almost the most important commemoration of all. I'd rather be remembered than have a statue and be forgotten. So, you know, I think the people in Serbia actually do pretty well there. But here, no, she doesn't really get the attention that she deserves. And I think part of it is, is the fact that people find, you know, if she'd fought on the Western Front, perhaps she'd be better known. But, you know, Serbia is a conflict that the war in Serbia isn't something that a lot of people know about. And I think it's quite difficult for people to get their heads around what went out there. It just seems like something that perhaps, you know, I mean, a lot of people that I speak to don't even know which side of the war Serbia fought on. You know, it's just, I mean, it's so obvious. But I think then to try to put Flora in the context of this is difficult for people, and perhaps it's too much effort. It could be that. And of course, Serbia received very negative press for many years, and I think that the fact that she'd fought for the Serbian army probably didn't make it any easier for her fame here. So a whole bunch of reasons coming together, but really she deserves to be far better remembered than she is.
Oh, thank you. Sylvia.
Yeah, taking the lead, Louise just said, Flora should be better known, and I do wish a very violent cinema woman, director, gets involved in reading her story, because it would be an excellent move, especially in the days we live now, you know, having survived a pandemic like she did, fought the way she did. She deserved to be better known, and I would be one that would go to the cinemas to watch her.
The film is optioned. The book is actually optioned, but it's obviously there were plans ahead to make something of it, but of course then the pandemic struck. So you know, it would be nice to think that a film would be made. Who knows?
Yeah,
I've always thought she'd make a fantastic.
Agreed.
You know, a film around here would be amazing if it's done right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. Thank you very much. Do we have more questions?
Actually, can I ask a question
Yes, please.
to the couple of people who've read it or read bits of it? I've had some comments that people didn't find Flora particularly likable always. And how did you like her when you read about her?
Well, I read the whole book, so I can tell you how I feel straight away. To start with, I didn't like her, to be honest. You know, liking the war. What a woman on those days would like a war? And then I kept on reading, and you grow into it, and you can't avoid to admire a woman like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes people find her in her absolute pursuit of doing what she wanted to do a bit selfish in a way. Although, frankly, I you know, in my view, I can see why people would think that. But again, you know, to do what she wanted to do, I mean, it's no different than a man would have wanted to do, really. So, you know, you kind of got to evaluate her against that. So, although I can see why people would see that about her, I'm not sure I agree with that position, because I think it's just, again, I don't see wanting to do what you want to do as a particular. I'm sure she was selfish, but you know, she did lots of stuff that wasn't just for her, like all her charity work that Zvezdana mentioned.
If you think about today, how we are treating children, boys and girls, and sons and daughters, and it would be completely okay for our boys to play with, if we let them, pistols and guns and wars, but it would not be for girls. to do the same. I was very, very girlish girl, so I don't have with me these issues. But I'm now grown up to think that if she has that wish and she has that attitude and she is determined, she just showing the strength that I would really admire in a sense. And it was strange for me when I started to research about the Great War, that we look at the war from different perspective, how people in 1914, 1913, 1915 had perspective about the war. And one of the women that I mentioned, I can't now remember her second name, but I think she's also Elsie. So she is from England. She was with her mother on Titanic, and they survived. Yes, and she was 26 when she wanted to be as a driver of ambulances and cars with Scottish Wing hospitals. When she is begging her mom, can I go, can I go? Evelina Harefield is organizing the group motor unit, transport unit. Can I go? So excited, so happy, like she's going for some kind of, you know, I don't know, happy event. I can't relate to that, but obviously this is something that they could at that time. So our points of view are quite different from it was at that time. Yeah.
I think that might have been Bowerman, I think is the woman you're referring.
Yes, she was the first barrister.
Yes, that's
yeah.
That's her. But yes, but again, I guess, you know, before the First World War, women really lives were pretty. It wasn't very exciting. You know, they couldn't kind of do a lot of things. You know, you had to be respectable. You had to kind of go to tennis parties and tea parties and church fetes. It really wasn't terribly exciting. So I can kind of see that, you know, that any form of excitement, war or something else, you know, they would have just done their best to get caught up in that.
And also, if you think how many people suffered in the first year during the war, that people from Britain would be actually very happy if they can do something to help Britain and Allied forces against. So it is patriotic also, not only for the sheer excitement. Yeah. Yes. So it is quite combined. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting topic. And yes, Pauline, do you want to ask a question?
I'm not sure if you can hear me there, Earl, because my connection is very bad. Yeah, I thought that she liked killing a little bit too much, but I've only read about something like 80 pages or something. But however, I think her experiences obviously, I think, and I definitely want to read the rest of the book because I'm fascinated by. Well done for writing a really, really well written book, actually, and it's fascinating because of the information that's in it, the realities of war, what it was like, and what it was like for women as well, and the restrictions for women, the fact that they weren't expected to do these things. And I think you are right that she obviously used this as a way to expand her horizons and her experiences and to get more excitement out of life. So yeah, thank you for the talk, actually. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Pauline. Well, it's 15:32. We are already over the time. Just one question for you, Louise. Are you preparing a new book? What material you are doing now on?
Do you know, sadly, it's I've had to. I work. This is actually my lunch break from I work in finance, and it's incredibly busy. Do you know, I've been doing it for many years, and I seem to get more and more thrown my way. So I kind of work 10, 11-hour days in finance. So by the end of the day, I'm too exhausted But as soon as I can, I've got lots of ideas about other things I want to do. The next one, I think, but the focus for me does tend to be the First World War. So I have a couple of other ideas, but they're early days.
Thank you very much, and keep us posted.
Sure.
Thank you very much for coming. We are so happy that you were here, and thank you everybody for being together today and reading the books. And if you haven't, please take a book from that list and read and see what you think about Flora. Can
I say thank you very much, Zvezdana, and thank you very much, Louise. That was really, really good. There's a person I've never heard of, and I'm fascinated now to read the book about her. Can I say, I made a slight typo in the comments. The next book session is the 9th of April, and it's Diary of a Young Naturalist by Dara McNulty, who was the winner of the 2020 Wainwright Prize for Nature Writing. Zvezdana will be hosting that one as well. So anybody who wants copies of the book, obviously we'll make sure we get books for you. But again, can I just say thank you to everybody for coming today. It was a really enjoyable session. Lovely. And I hope everybody has a happy Easter and look forward to seeing you all in a couple of weeks.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.